Asking, has he made the world safer or more dangerous? Joining me now are the Sunday Telegraph columnist and spokesperson for the Republicans overseas, Molly Kinari, and the political analyst and journalist, Beth Gardner. Welcome to you both. Why is he doing this? Why is he making this visit to Asia, China, Vietnam, South Korea? Is it one of reassurance in the face of Kim Jong-un and his threats?
Sure, I think it's a trip of reassurance. I also think it's fairly ordinary diplomatic protocol. So he's already done a major trip to Europe, a major trip to the Middle East, and now it's time for a major trip to Asia. Well, no, but that's coming soon, don't worry. I wouldn't worry too much about the timing of this trip. I think it simply underscores how important these countries are to both American economic and diplomatic goals.
And what's he going to say to them about, in particular, about North Korea?
I imagine he'll be trying to get the Chinese to agree to step up their own attempts to get the North Koreans to back off of some of their more bombastic threats.
I mean, you know, his message is that Obama was weak. He is now ready to confront people, and he claims he's getting responses. Is there any truth in that?
I don't think we've seen much evidence of it yet. You know, I think as with Trump in a lot of different areas, there's sort of always this headline kind of bellicosity that's doesn't necessarily often appear to be backed up by any kind of a strategy. I think he's put a lot of his sort of eggs in the basket of China and his relationship with President Xi, and trying to get the Chinese to lean more heavily on North Korea than they have in the past. Obviously, it's been accompanied by these, you know, fairly frightening tweets at various times of fire and fury he was promising over the summer, and a real seeming to sort of ratchet up tensions with Kim Jong-un rather than what you might expect from the American side to try to kind of keep things calm from, you know, either a Bush or an Obama type of presidency. But I think as far as China, I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see how that trip plays out, because he's really been all over the map about China. Obviously, back during the campaign,
it was trade war.
The China bashing was a real centerpiece of his rhetoric. You know, they're raping us, his words. They're taking advantage of us. And, you know, post-election, we've occasionally heard that. But he's been much more, you know, he hasn't followed through on some of the threats to sort of declare them currency manipulators and that sort of thing. And he's been very engaged with his, you know, at least talking up. I've got such a great relationship with President Xi. He congratulated him the other day on Xi's, you know, consolidation of power and his elevation recently at the party conference. And he's very overtly said, you know, we think China needs to solve this North Korea problem. So I think one thing we've seen with Trump, we saw it on the Middle Eastern trip earlier this year, is that, you know, foreign leaders can see that he loves to be flattered. They can see that, you know, on most issues, particularly these complicated foreign policy things, his knowledge really does not go very deep beyond sort of the headline level. You know, and I think they can see that makes him pretty vulnerable to manipulation. And to being sort of played a little bit. And I think, you know, we may see a bit of that in China. The Chinese know what they're doing. They've got a long-term strategy, and Trump doesn't. So
he's blinked first, in a sense. He's been faced down by President Xi. Would you?
I don't think he thinks he's blinked.
I'm not sure that is how I would characterize it. I would say, as Beth has said, that the relationship is tremendously complicated. And we overuse this, but it is really a game of three-dimensional chess that we have to be playing here. And I think, first and foremost, we're looking for the president to not make any major diplomatic gaffes throughout this trip to offend our friends and our partners in Asia.
I mean, there's been some comment in Britain and in France and Germany saying that now actually the global leadership is being provided by the Chinese on things like climate change, on free trade, which, you know, Trump is effectively withdrawing.
Yes, well, for the moment, I'm not sure I would disagree with that, but I think this trip does provide an opportunity to take back that role that America has traditionally played as a bastion of free trade, as the defender of the free world and of free people all over that world. My understanding is that he'll be giving a major address in Vietnam on strengthening the ability of countries in the Indo-Pacific sphere to resist the attempts of countries, specifically China, to encroach upon territories in the South China Sea. And I think that his willingness to engage on those topics is critical to making sure that the perception and the reality is that America is still a leader on these key issues. I think that this would also be a fantastic time for him to announce that he is going to get the US to rejoin the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which he has said that we will be withdrawing from, and to announce that he will make it a priority to get Congress to ratify the deal.
You think there's any chance of that?
No, zero. I mean, one of the only things he's been consistent on really through his career is this trade bashing, this anti-trade deal thing. And I think TPP is probably the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the one he hates the most. I mean, that was really very literally almost one of his first acts in office was to withdraw from it, partly, I think, out of a desire to start ripping up Obama's proudest achievements that he was proudest of. But, you know, I think his opposition to these deals, particularly the multilateral deals, he likes a bilateral one-on-one, and that's very much out of the Bannon sort of nationalistic playbook. I can't imagine him, you know, ever considering putting TPP back on the table.
I mean, you'd like to see
because he boasts about having ripped it up.
Sure. I mean, do you think it's a possibility?
I think it's a rather optimistic possibility. It's something I would certainly like to see happen. My understanding is also that the president is going to be pursuing bilateral trade agreements with a number of countries, including Japan and probably Vietnam as well. And he's also looking to renegotiate the Chorus agreement with South Korea. So we will see trade feature as a major part of this trip over the next 11 days.
Of course, he's going to be, you know, accompanied by a big pack of journalists, and to an extent, as often happens, rather more exposed abroad than he is at home. And they're, you know, big domestic troubles that they'll be asking him about.
Of course, this Russia investigation is looming over everything. This was a huge week on that front, with the first indictments landing of his campaign chairman and another associate, and even more significantly, the revelation that one of Trump's foreign policy advisors has been cooperating with the investigation and potentially even wearing a wire for several months now. So that's huge, and it's Trump's you know, sort of bête noire. He's always been absolutely obsessed with this Russia thing, I think because he feels that it's intended to kind of undermine the legitimacy of his election. I think in some sense his aides may hope that getting him out of the White House, away from the TV, which he tends to sort of constantly stew in that news coverage and then start, you know, anger tweeting. They're hoping, I suspect, that getting him out of that environment, change of scene, keep him busy with, you know, the many events that he'll be sort of attending on this trip will kind of get him out of that a little bit. But, you know, there's also the possibility 11 days is a long time to be away. Who knows, something else may drop, further twists and turns in this special counsel investigation. So, you know, that is a story that looms over everything now.
Do you think he has turned into quarry, really, now, given the allegations that are emerging from Robert Mueller's inquiry?
I think they're serious. It should also be noted that the inquiry isn't done yet. We don't have any definitive answers on precisely what happened and where and how. And so I think it's probably not helpful for any of us, and also not for the president, to speculate on what the end of that investigation or the various congressional investigations will be. I think over the course of this trip, what's happening at home is only going to be a story in as much as he allows it to be a story by feeding the fire on Twitter. If he has the self-discipline to step away and to do the usual grip and grins that these trips entail, I think that he would be able to change the narrative to something much more positive. He might be able to get his strong leader numbers up.
When you heard that his Twitter account had been briefly suspended, did part of you as a Republican think it wouldn't be nice if it could be suspended forever?
Suspended forever, perhaps not. It would be nice if the president chose to not tweet so much. Probably not good for private employees of a private company to be taking that right away from him.
But it works for him, doesn't it, in fact?
Yes and no. I mean, he uses it to rile up the base and sort of, you know, fuel these kind of culture war issues that have been successful for him. But I think even when you hear from a lot of Trump's supporters, maybe not the sort of really, you know, core group that's on his side no matter what, but, you know, I certainly hear, you know, from some Republicans, I like his policies on tax, I like this and I like that, but I just wish he would stop tweeting. I mean, I'm not sure it works so well for him. It's his trademark for sure, and it's a direct way of communicating with the voters. I thought this 12-minute, takedown overnight was sort of interesting too, in that, there's a security issue here. I mean, a presidential tweet has the power to, spark an international incident, to tank the share price of a company like that. These are powerful tweets, and particularly for a campaign that was built on accusing his opponent of not having good enough, online security around her email accounts, as we remember from the campaign against Hillary Clinton last year. The sort of electronic security practices of this White House have been astonishingly lax. And, he's on Twitter. Everyone knows he may tweet this or that. So anything that comes onto that account is sort of credible, that people would believe it's real. And, we've seen from the fact that some anonymous person at this company, which surely, thousands of people at Twitter have access to, presumably manipulating accounts, he's put himself in a position where he's very vulnerable to a hack that has pretty serious consequences. So, the irony is thick.
What do you think he's going to tweet about Vietnam, given its place in America's consciousness because of the war?
I would be surprised if he tweeted specifically about the Vietnam War, except to say that we're very glad to have Vietnam as a close ally. It, I think, would be quite unusual for an American politician, even for an unusual American politician like the president, to inflate or to drag up those old wounds.
We shall see. It's going to be interesting. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
This is All Out Politics. Coming up next.